Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday the 13th, November 2020. So here's a tech update for you. I got some advice from ContraCou, and I decided to splash out $150 for this new webcam. And I got some advice about lighting gear, which I'll have to send away for that. But I hope this is an upgrade. This camera is supposed to be far more sensitive to light than the one that I had previously. Anran says KMG looks like he is standing in the dock in the screenshot. Really? Oh, okay. I'm looking at the representation at my end. It looks much better, but of course it's going to get dark soon. So we'll see what happens. I don't have any external lights here. I haven't had any opportunity to experiment with this camera, light level, hue, whatever. But I will do that over the weekend. Let's start with the Twilight of the elite. This is from Mediaite. Dan Abrams, ABC chief legal analyst and Sirius XM radio host Dan Abrams warned he thinks there is now a tiny chance that President Donald Trump could steal this election. During a discussion on his radio show, he explained how he has grown more alarmed by Trump's ongoing efforts to undo his 2020 election loss. Quote, "I've been saying for a week now that there's nothing to worry about. My answer is always no. I'm starting to think that there's a tiny chance that he will successfully steal this election, tiny, less than 5%. For the first time, I'm seriously considering the possibility that he's going to be able to steal the election. And it's not because of the legal fights, let's be clear," he added, detailing several of the Trump campaign's fruitless and nuisance lawsuits. Reed Richardson wrote this story, and I guess this is what counts for reporting on the web now. Back to Abrams. Crazy arguments, right? But they still can't do what the president is doing, which is just sending out wackadoodle stuff, Abrams noted, before pointing to Trump's latest conspiracy theory, which has been thoroughly debunked, that a voting system used by many states either deleted or switched millions of votes. It's not been thoroughly debunked. If this were true, it could change the election, right? Abrams said. But there's a reason they're not arguing this in court, because it hasn't got to court yet, Abrams. This is a conspiracy theory that has been debunked repeatedly. Oh, yes, debunked. So we went to the people in charge and said, did anything untoward happen under your watch? No. That couldn't happen. But of course, that doesn't stop the president from saying it, Abrams contended. Truth isn't the issue. Oh, they're interested in truth now, are they? So, Dan, why are you saying that you are becoming at least a little concerned that he's going to try and steal the election? Language from Pennsylvania lawmakers makes me very nervous, Abrams explained, citing a report that two of the state's top legislators are now mulling a more assertive role in choosing the state's electors, which would disregard Biden's state popular vote win and bring Trump back instead because they consider the vote totals to be in dispute. Here's the problem, Abrams warned, noting that the same legislators who had previously sworn off any state legislative role in appointing elections were now caveating their previous declaration with the disclaimer, under normal circumstances. This is astonishing, Abrams said. Why are you hedging? President Trump and his allies are getting to these guys. This is pure corruption. Projection.text. This would be an all-out effort to steal the election. I am concerned for the first time that an effort to steal the election going to the Electoral College could theoretically succeed, he said. Did he really say the same thing 4 times? Or is this just a very poorly written and edited story by Mediaite? I think it very unlikely, but last week I would have told you there was no chance This week, I will say that it's very, very unlikely. Read the Constitution, legal expert Dan Abrams. At Drudge, of course. Oh, it's 306 electoral votes for Biden, 232 for Trump. It's a landslide. An absolute landslide. 10 days left to prove fraud. Will he stay until inauguration? Homeland Security Chief defies President. Let's see what that's all about. The Department of Homeland Security Acting Secretary Chad Wolf is defying President Trump's order to terminate election cybersecurity official Christopher Krebs. Multiple sources tell the Post. The White House on Wednesday evening instructed Wolf to fire Krebs after Krebs openly dismissed claims of voter fraud in the November 3rd election. He gave us a bunch of reasons why he didn't want to do it, and he said no, a senior White House official told the Post about Wolf's refusal. If anything, Chad is carrying Krebs' water, the source added. Krebs, a former Microsoft executive, has since 2017 led DHS's cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency and recently launched a rumor control website to debunk claims of voter fraud. A CISA panel declared Thursday that the November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. Oh, really? What, they went back to 1789 and they went through all the elections since then? No, not bloody likely. They just, election fraud, Joe, election fraud, Bill, election fraud, Jim, no. Okay, there's no election fraud. That's pretty much how it went down. Let's see what Donald J. Trump has to say on Twitter. Oh, yes, and the Las Vegas Review-Journal, he notes a story there, which I will get to. He retweets Kyle Becker. Dominion, back in 2016, a Princeton prof demonstrated exactly how to hack a Dominion machine. I figured out how to make a slightly different computer program that shifts some votes around from one candidate to another. Wait, isn't that what we have been saying? He retweets Lou Dobbs talking about Dominion and Operation Warp Speed, which is the vaccine, which I will get to later. I'll just mention that at 5:30, I'm going to be talking about David Mikish's book, Stanley Kubrick, American Filmmaker, on the book club. We'll be having a press conference from the Rose Garden in 15 minutes. Yes, I'll be talking about that. Now it is learned that the horrendous Dominion voting system was used in Arizona and big in Nevada. No wonder the result was a very close loss. Heartwarming to see all the tremendous support out there, especially the organic rallies that are springing up all over the country, including a big one on Saturday in D.C. They're calling that the Million MAGA March. I may even try to stop by and say hello. This election was rigged from Dominion all the way up and down. And then finally, 8 hours ago, for years, the Dems have been preaching how unsafe and rigged our elections have been. Now they are saying what a wonderful job the Trump administration did in making 2020 the most secure election ever. Actually, this is true, except for what the Democrats did. Rigged election. And you may have seen the meme that's going around of pre-Twitter Twitter, which I have found very amusing indeed. And it harkens back to the days when people were allowed to give their opinion, without some overweening organization deciding that they are the sole arbiter of truth. Sole arbiter of truth. If you want to know all of the facts, just go to Twitter or to Facebook, because, facts, they're chiseled in stone. There's never any disagreement about facts. No, never. There has never been any disagreement about facts in history, because, historical profession, it pretty much vanished because they discovered that there was a book published on a subject, say Napoleon, which has all of the facts, all of the truth about Napoleon. And so there's no need for any competing narratives, because this book contains all of the facts, which cannot be disputed. Here are some of these memes. A tweet from God the Father Almighty at Dominus Deus. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat, for in what day soever thou shalt eat of it, thou shalt die the death. And then from Twitter, an exclamation point, and learn how, if you eat the fruit, you will not die, but will be as gods, knowing good and evil. Here's another one from Paul Revere at Freedom and Liberty. The British are coming, the British are coming, exclamation point. Learn how British taxes are beneficial for society. Yeah. Echo Chamber has been reading James Burnham's The Machiavellians, and he has a quite apposite quote. In every society, regardless of its political form, an organized minority constitutes the actual ruling class. It rules by myths that unify society and facilitate the acquisition of the habits that keep the ruled in their accustomed grooves of behavior. In times of stress, when the ruled see through the myths and become restive, the rulers fall back on fraud to retain their power. If the fraud is no longer accepted and resistance begin, the rulers resort to naked force, which of course is exactly what we are seeing here. Ryan Landry writes at the American Sun, so who won the election? The media tells me that Joe Biden is the president-elect. The president tells us that he won and will expose fraud proving that he won. Nothing is certified. Looking out at America, who do you think won? The left performed what looked like Ewok Yub-Nub celebrations at vanquishing the emperor. The right has engaged in rallies full of spirit and energy. The creepy feelings of doubt and anxiety are setting in for the left. We will find out in a month. In the meantime, the right should be calling their elected state officials in contested states and preparing them not to release electors or to send a state of Trump electors. The actual work to be done to prove fraudulent acts is on the Trump administration. They have to prove it. Affidavits, video, actual evidence, etc. is for them to assemble. Audits and canvasses are for the Trump team to get moving. This is moving to the courts and machinations of state political systems. We know the left manipulates procedural outcomes. Certain aspects of fraud are difficult to prove in short time frames, which is why flooding the zone of all the angles of cheating is a smart move by the Trump team. Everything matters. We have long known the cheating and fraud that happens in cities. Romney lost when precincts in Ohio had 106% turnout, or he lost areas 16,000 votes to 0. Trump being Trump, this is the chance not only to win, but to shine a light for all to see just how corrupt democracy is. Win-win. Because the left manipulates procedures, and this is an actual color revolution attempt, what can you do? Keep that upbeat, happy warrior vibe going. In all color revolutions, the media and usurpers attempted to frame the illegitimate one as powerless and with no defenders. That's why state capital rallies are key. A reader explained to me how his state capital had 2 rallies. One was a pro-Biden celebration of 25 people at a monument. The other was a long march and rally of hundreds of Trump supporters. The media framed this as one would expect. Keep the public displays out there and be positive and patriotic. You are not alone. There are over 70 million Trump voters. These public displays do matter because as this hits the state legislatures and courts, we know both are swayed by the public itself. The Constitution does not matter. If it did, would we have gay marriage or abortion? Keep sharing information, but pay close attention to what is censored. Twitter is hiding very effective arguments for Trump being cheated while letting you share Benford's Law tweets left and right. Might be a sign. One word of warning, and this should be painfully obvious. The quiet little group called the Proud Boys now is having an internal battle and going open about being Nazi. This is the same organization that Chris Wallace and Joe Biden cited at debates. Why do you think that is? If I had to guess, I'd say the federal assets within the org have been activated so they can pull off some terrible shenanigans in the next 80 days. They do something dumb to discredit the entire right, and in the event of a Biden win, voila, the new administration has a reason to crack down on the entire right. Don't waste a second with those fools. If you are a decent guy and involved with them, run. The White House is not backing down. They're going to the mattresses. All the right messaging is out there with direct citation of fraud and in a variety of means. They are hiring the technical analysis people and the lawyers needed for a multi-state fight. Media gaslighting is so strong that they will create anonymous sources to say anything. Do not believe anything about conceding unless from the main source himself. This is the story. There is a story that I keep coming back to that describes this moment and how the entire left wants Trump to concede while so much is up in the air and they act increasingly nervous. It is a bride sale. A young man sets up a farm on the frontier and now wants a wife. He hears of a wife broker in the boomtown. He writes letters and travels into town. When he gets to the house, the couple, respectable Mr. and Mrs. Bronfman, talk up this girl. She is a beauty, can cook and clean, wants a big family, and all the fantastic things he has been dreaming through his lonely nights. He asks to see her. Well, the Bronfmans resist. Just sign the deal. He says no, he wants to see her, as it is an expensive contract for a simple farmer. They let him look into the other room through a doorway. She is seated looking away from him, but her shape looks nice in the 19th century clothes. Still, he wants to see her closer. Well, they resist. Just sign the deal and she'll walk over. He says no, he wants to see her closer. They motion and she turns. Her mouth is closed, but she has a decent face. Yet her hat is pulled low and he can barely see her eyes. The couple stands over him and waves the contract. Sign, and she will run into your arms, forever devoted to you. The young man thanks them for their offer, but respectfully declines. He walks out, and it being a boomtown, he enjoys the sights. He picks up some goods and then goes into a saloon. It is full service, and he inquires about companionship. The rates are steep, and he asks if they can cut him a deal. The madam says, sure. She has just the girl. The madam says, shapely lass. She has a limp. Her eyes are crossed, but after she is done with you, you're the one cross-eyed. Best $3 she'll spend in town. The young man peps up, looks around, and asks which saloon maid is the one. The madam says, she's been at the Bronfmans all morning, but should be back any time. Let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say about the latest. His column today is called The Worm in the Machine. The avatars of good government, Joe Biden and his righteous Democrats, seem a little bit spooked by the globe of silence enveloping Mr. Trump and his lawyers the past few days. The Dems' narrative at this point, mid-game, is that, quote, the election was the most secure in the nation's history, unquote, the New York Times. Anything else is a conspiracy theory. Here's what the Democrats don't tell you. Theories are subject to proof, and proof brings theories into compliance with reality, including sometimes the part about conspiracy, such as a conspiracy to queer the recent election with vote tabulation software and other wizardries. I guess we'll find out what can be proven, and that is all the president is attempting to do, like anybody with faith in the scientific method. In Oakland County, Michigan, for instance, comprising the northwest suburbs and exurbs of Detroit, the graph shows a mysterious bending of votes off a trend line at a pretty clear break point. Each blue square is a voter precinct. 40,000 Biden lead, 20,000 votes taken from Trump, 20,000 votes given to Biden. The very same plot line is repeated in several other Michigan counties, heavily trending for the president in early voting, and then swooning mysteriously for Biden after a 4-hour break in action. How to account for this strange occurrence? The worm in the machine, perhaps, a simple algorithm, i.e. set of coded instructions, embedded in the Dominion vote tabulation software, product of a company, to remind you, partially owned by Senator Feinstein's husband, Richard C. Bloom, and represented by lobbyist Nadiem El-Shami, Nancy Pelosi's former chief of staff. It was El-Shami's mission to visit state legislators across the country and persuade them to adopt, that is, purchase, the Dominion system. The algorithm appears to subtract votes from one candidate and add them to the other candidate. It's a feature, not a bug. Weird, a little bit. So that's one thing that remains to be proven. How did the algorithm work? Can it be isolated and described? Did its task leave digital footprints? Not all the software geniuses in the USA work for Silicon Valley. Some may be assisting Trump's attorneys in figuring this out and constructing cases for various courts. Since it takes more than a day and a half to bring lawsuits, that may account for the Democrats' rush to preemptorily discard such formal inquiries and just declare Biden the winner. Similar ballot tabulation doings show up in the Georgia vote, where a recount is underway, this time with observers, well, we'll see, and without 4-hour mystery pauses. And then there is Pennsylvania. If DC is the swamp, then Pennsylvania is a Nile Valley of ballot harvesting, overflowing its banks every November to fertilize especially the loamy precincts of Philadelphia, where votes spring up like ground ivy. As it happened this season, on top of that rich reaping of cultivated votes was an additional layer of state government monkey shines now headed for adjudication in the U.S. Supreme Court. Will they dare to take the case? It's not a sure thing, but they'd better have a good reason not to, because a whole lot of vested credibility in our national system of government is at stake. In the meantime, I'm standing by to see how things pan out. If those 3 states' electoral votes, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, are shifted to Trump's column by retabulation, with late reporting North Carolina added, then the president will end up with 284 electoral votes, making him the winner and Biden the loser with 238. Other combinations of adding or subtracting the electoral votes of these states at issue would leave no clear winner and thus propel the matter into the House of Representatives, where the peculiar constitutional map, 1 vote for each state delegation, does not favor Biden. Doesn't look like the extreme long shot that the captive news media is touting it to be. Of course, in the event that none of this goes Trump's way, then of course Biden moves into the White House with his 2 German shepherds, plus the entire Russiagate cast of characters, a delegation of Silicon Valley knobs, and half of K Street to assist him in governing the USA. That outcome will set up all the right people to preside over the greatest economic collapse in the history of the world. Okay, have it your way. Just saying. Let's see. Ryan Landry has a link to Abigail Shrier, who I was talking about in the book club, last week? And she's in the news again. And I will be talking about that a little later. But let's talk about Peter Turchin. The next decade could be even worse. A historian believes he has discovered iron laws that predict the rise and falls of society. He has bad news. This is from The Atlantic, from the December 2020 issue. Peter Turchin, one of the world's experts on pine beetles and possibly also on human beings, met me reluctantly this summer on the campus of the University of Connecticut at Storrs, where he teaches. Like many people during the pandemic, he preferred to limit his human contact. He also doubted whether human contact would have much value anyway, when his mathematical models could tell me everything I need to know. The year 2020 has been kind to Turchin for many of the same reasons it has been hell for the rest of us. Cities on fire, elected leaders endorsing violence, homicides surging. To a normal American, these are apocalyptic signs. To Turchin, they indicate that his models, which incorporate thousands of years of data about human history, are working. Not all of human history, he corrected me once, just the last 10,000 years. He has been warning for a decade that a few key social and political trends portend an age of discord, civil unrest and carnage worse than most Americans have experienced. In 2010, he predicted that the unrest would get serious around 2020 and wouldn't let up until those social and political trends reversed. Havoc at the level of the late 60s and early 70s is the best case scenario. An all-out civil war is the worst. The fundamental problems, Turchin says, are a dark triad of social maladies. A bloated elite class with too few elite jobs to go around, declining living standards among the general population, and a government that can't cover its financial positions. His models, which track these factors in other societies across history, are too complicated to explain in a non-technical publication. But they've succeeded in impressing writers for non-technical publications, and have won him comparisons to the other authors of mega histories such as Jared Diamond and Yuval Noah Harari. The New York Times columnist Ross Douthat had once found Turchin's historical modeling unpersuasive, but 2020 made him a believer. The fate of our own society, Turchin says, is not going to be pretty, at least in the near future. It's too late, he said, to relax a ride on the wooden swing. The problems are deep and structural, not the type that the tedious process of democratic change can fix in time to forestall mayhem. Turchin likens America to a huge ship headed directly for an iceberg. If you have a discussion among the crew about which way to turn, you will not turn in time and you will hit the iceberg directly. The past 10 years or so have been discussion. That sickening crunch you now hear, steel twisting, rivets popping, is the sound of the ship hitting the iceberg. We are almost guaranteed 5 hellish years, Turchin predicts, and likely a decade or more. The problem, he says, is that there are too many people like me. You are ruling class, he said, with no more rancor than if he had informed me that I had brown hair or a slightly newer iPhone than his. Of the 3 factors driving social violence, Turchin stresses most heavily elite overproduction, the tendency of a society's ruling class to grow faster than the number of positions for their members to fill. One way for a ruling class to grow is biologically. Think of Saudi Arabia, where princes and princesses are born faster than royal roles can be created for them. In the United States, elites overproduce themselves through economic and educational upward mobility. More and more people get rich and more get educated. Neither of those sounds bad on its own. Don't we want everyone to be rich and educated? The problems begin when money and Harvard degrees become like royal titles in Saudi Arabia. If lots of people have them, but only some have real power, the ones who don't have power eventually turn on the ones who do. In the United States, Turchin said, you can see more and more aspirants fighting for a single job at, say, a prestigious law firm or in an influential government sinecure, or here it got personal, at a national magazine. Perhaps seeing the holes in my t-shirt, Turchin noted that a person can be part of an ideological elite rather than an economic one. He doesn't view himself as a member of either. A professor reaches at most a few hundred students, he told me. You reach hundreds of thousands. Elite jobs do not multiply as fast as elites do. There are still only 100 Senate seats, but more people than ever have enough money or degrees to think they should be running the country. You have a simulation now where there are many more elites fighting for the same position, and some portion of them will convert to counter elites. I've been thinking about Turchin for quite a long time. And I mean, you can see this playing out in Portland. How many of those people burning things and smashing things on the streets of Portland for the last, 4 months? How many of them are graduates of, say, Portland State University? When Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, was overrun by crazies a couple of years, I think a large part of it has to do with the fact that these people know that the future is not going to be kind to them. They went to university, they spent a lot of money, or their parents spent a lot of money, or they borrowed a lot of money, and they graduate with a worthless degree and they feel cheated. Wait a minute, I'm supposed to be a member of the elite. Where is my cushy job? Where is my payoff? Where is my row house in Washington, D.C.? Ricardo Williams says KMG looks like his mom dressed him for church. Nobody dresses like this for church anymore. I saw Joe Biden taking his son's Hunter Biden's daughter for her confirmation a couple of weeks ago. And she was wearing a skirt above the knee, and she was wearing a plunging blouse. And her brother was wearing, a short sleeve shirt and shorts. Yeah, nobody dresses up Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, says to Ricardo Williams, "You act like this is the first time you have seen the KMG show." Yes, this is my uniform in order to, I suppose, distinguish myself from everyone else. Anyone catch my interview with Lena Wolf, says Jonathan Pohl. Chad Chadson again says that was a great interview, Professor Otto. Jokerkin 666, why do they hate the president? Because of the color of his skin. Revolution of rising expectations, I suppose you could say. That they've grown up in a world where, what was it, Bill Clinton, who was applauding whites becoming a minority? And it cannot happen. One, it cannot happen fast enough for them. And two, they look at, say, television, they look at the internet, and they think, well, we are already a majority. Why are these white people still running things? Okay. What else do we have here on the chat? Production value is going through the roof, KMG. You must love your listeners. Well, I do what I can. I do what I can. And I must say that the light level outside has, it's not completely dark, but it's very dark indeed. And I still look human on the picture here. None of the cancer face, the puce menace. Fake flowers for the win, says Ricardo Williams. Yeah, well, they're still pretty though, aren't they? I love real flowers, but they are rather expensive, particularly at this time of year. Okay, and Alex DeLarge says the 2000s and early 2010s were fairly conservative as compared to the 1980s and 1990s. I wonder about that. It seems pretty linear to me, actually. Okay, I got the joke, says Halper. Okay. And what is up next on our live stream? Oh, yes. The attempts to force consent from the media. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. CNN's anti-Trump derangement propaganda reached new heights Thursday with a segment in which chief international anchor Christiane Amanpour directly compared the president's first term with an infamous Nazi crackdown operation. Amanpour announced that she was remembering Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, a 1938 Nazi effort to purge the fascist German nation of Jewish culture. Quote, this week, 82 years ago, Kristallnacht appeared. It was the Nazis' warning shot across the bow of our human civilization that led to genocide against a whole identity, Amanpour declared before stating that Trump's presidency is the modern day equivalent. Kristallnacht was essentially the beginning of the Holocaust. While showing footage of Nazis burning books, Amanpour proclaimed that tower of burning books, it led to an attack on fact, knowledge, history, and truth. After 4 years of a modern-day assault on those same values by Donald Trump, the Biden-Harris team pledges a return to norms, including the truth. Amanpour is the same CNN host who last year suggested that the FBI could arrest anyone chanting, lock her up, at a Trump rally and charge them with hate speech. Earlier this year, Amanpour also gave a platform to an Iranian government official who once said that she wouldn't hesitate to shoot American hostages in the head. Yes, backlash. It doesn't really matter. They have, going back to 2016, we heard from Sarah Silverman, that sage, that Trump was worse than Hitler. The problem with going to Hitler is that there's nowhere else that you can go after that. It's just, that's the end. And they've been at the end for 4 years, but 4 years ago, it was only clowns like Sarah Silverman. Now it is the distinguished, and I suppose I could go to Wikipedia and find a list of dozens of awards that Christiane Amanpour has won. But the message is clear. If you do not support Biden, if you are in favor of even of Trump getting to the bottom of what happened on November 13th, you are a Nazi, pure and simple. And people don't like being called Nazis, especially when the only thing that they've ever done was to vote for Donald Trump. Let's see how that turns out. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Twitter users are pointing to a clip from Don Lemon's show last night in which they claim the CNN host mistakenly read a teleprompter cue to scream. How about some facts, okay? Again, with the facts. All these people in the mainstream media, they sound like Ben Shapiro now. Facts and logic. How about some facts? Lemon says Trump supporters are circulating a list of social media that purports to be a list of dead people who are voting, right? This is a fraud, people. Scream, says Lemon, before stumbling slightly over his words and remarking, okay, that's what it says. All right. So I pointed out the ridiculousness of Don Lemon being on television. Of course, he is a twofer. But there's a problem here. It's all very well to laugh at this, but the more attention that is paid to the incompetence and sheer bad faith of these people, the more that it becomes normalized. I call this the Jerry Springer principle. When Jerry Springer's show started, we were invited to laugh at these ugly, stupid people and their various perversions. But after a few years, well, who are we to say that these are perversions? Because we keep hearing about these practices. So I guess they must be normalized now. Dinesh D'Souza tweets, "This is disturbing. Facebook removed the title of president from Donald Trump and designated him as political candidate. Trump is still president, and no matter what happens, will remain so until Inauguration Day." I would say that this is shocking, this decision by Facebook, but none of this stuff is shocking anymore. Isaac Saul tweeted, "The New York Times called elections officials in every state. Not a single one from either party said there was evidence of widespread fraud that changes the election's outcome. This isn't going to work," referring to this same New York Times article. Chief Morale Officer Duck, or Quackocracy, responded, "We called 100 Sicilian grandfathers and not a single one of them admitted to knowing anything about the mafia. It simply doesn't exist." For what it's worth, Alan Dershowitz, a famed American lawyer and Harvard Law School professor emeritus, told Breitbart on Thursday that President Donald Trump is likely to win a lawsuit his campaign filed in Pennsylvania, challenging the legitimacy of mail-in ballots received after Election Day. He predicted that the U.S. Supreme Court would take up the Trump campaign's lawsuit if the number of votes being challenged are large enough to change the outcome of the presidential election in Pennsylvania. He said the Pennsylvania legislature had basically said no to that, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said yes because of the pandemic, that is, counting votes up to 3 days after November the 3rd, including those without postmarks. That may have been the right decision in some theoretical sense, Dershowitz responded, but the Constitution doesn't permit anybody in the state but the legislature to make decisions about elections. That was decided correctly in Bush versus Gore, and I think that 4-4 vote would become a 5-4 vote if the issue came before the Supreme Court and there were not disputed ballots to make a difference in the outcome of the election. That remains to be seen. Okay, so let's have today's roundup of election fraud. There are just so many of these stories, and the left, or let's just say the establishment, because that's what it is, responds with, "That never happened, you're making it up. Oh, that Project Veritas guy, he's a jerk. You can't believe him." Sure, there's some fraud, but it's insignificant. This is from Michael Patrick Leahy at Breitbart. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman is encouraging non-Georgia residents to move to the state so they can register to vote in 2 January the 5th U.S. Senate runoff elections. Quote, I hope everybody moves to Georgia, in the next month or two, registers to vote and votes for these 2 Democratic senators, unquote, he told CNN's, wait for it, Chris Cuomo on Tuesday. Let's see. While Friedman stopped short of calling on non-Georgia residents to move temporarily to state solely for the purpose of voting in the January 5th runoff elections before returning to their homes outside Georgia, other Democratic activists appear to have encouraged non-Georgia residents to move to the state temporarily only for the purpose of voting in those runoff elections. Anyone who claims to be a Georgia resident who is not currently registered to vote has until December the 7th to register and be qualified to vote in both January 5th elections. But temporary voter registration is illegal under Georgia law if the person who registers to vote does not intend to remain a permanent resident of the state. That'd be a hard one to prove, does not intend. How much is your vote worth, by the way? For most people, moving is a very expensive operation. So we're supposed to believe that thousands, tens of thousands of people would vote or would move to Georgia temporarily just to vote, and then would what? Move back? That they would be literally spending thousands of dollars just to cast one vote in 2 Senate elections, or 2 votes for 2 Senate elections. Hannah Blow at Breitbart says the Georgia GOP, Tea Party patriots, and the Trump campaign believe Georgia's recount is lacking several key components to ensure accuracy and credibility. On Wednesday, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger announced a full by-hand recount in each county in the Peach State, stressing that such a move would help build confidence in the state's final election results. He described it as a heavy lift, as the process would involve an audit, recount, and recanvass all at once. A few key players, however, have expressed concern over the process presented by Raffensperger, contending that it lacks certain essential procedures, such as verifying signature matches on absentee ballots. And I've seen pictures of this. They have put the observers so far away from the vote count that they can't see anything. Oh, and this is the story from the Las Vegas Review-Journal that President Trump referred to on tweet. It's from Victor Jakes. Clark County election officials accepted my signature on 8 ballot return envelopes during the general election. It's more evidence that signature verification is a flawed security measure. For months, election officials have told Nevadans not to worry about ballots piling up in apartment trash cans or sent to wrong addresses. Discarded mail ballots cannot just be picked up and voted by anyone. A fact sheet from the Secretary of State's office says all mail ballots must be signed on the ballot return envelope. The signature is used to authenticate the voter and confirm that it was actually the voter and not another person who returned the mail ballot. I wanted to test that claim by simulating what might happen if someone returned ballots that didn't belong to him or her. Plenty of people had this opportunity. Billy Guerin, a 10-year Las Vegas resident, found 5 loose ballots in his apartment mailroom. A reader emailed me a picture of a pile of mail on the side of the road, which included loose ballots. There are numerous pictures of similar examples on social media. 9 people participated in this test. I wrote their names in cursive using my normal handwriting. They then copied my version of their name onto the ballot envelope. This 2-step process was necessary to ensure no laws were broken. On Monday, I asked Clark County Registrar Joe Gloria about the scenario if ballots signed by someone else came through. We would still have the signature match to rely on for identity, he said. Asked if he was confident the safeguard would identify those ballots, he said, I'm confident that the process has been working throughout this process. He was wrong. 8 of the 9 ballots went through. In other words, signature verification had an 89% failure rate in catching mismatched signatures. Is anyone? Oh, wow, we've got really dark here in a hurry. Hang on a second. Let's see, is that any better? And well, we got this ugly shadow, and it looks like the puce is coming back. As I say, I will be getting some sort of lighting rig. Oh, I don't know. In the next somewhere between 1 to 3 weeks, I guess. And then that should fix the problem. But what's up next? Oh, there's a rundown of stories here from the Gateway Pundit, exclusive based on reports by auditors, IT specialists, data analysts, and statisticians. The number of illegitimate votes identified in 4 swing states are enough to overturn election. Michigan witness and former state senator witnessed early morning ballot dump of 61 boxes at TCF Center. Oh, and breaking, President Trump may make surprise appearance at a Trump MAGA rally in Freedom Plaza on Saturday in D.C. Pelosi to hold large dinner for new House members as Democrats urge Americans to stay home and not host family gatherings due to coronavirus. Paul Sperry, pro-Biden bug also suspected in Georgia's vote counting software. Look, if you're going to come up with a process which can be diverted, which can be made to cheat, someone is going to try to make it cheat. It's really that simple. Have these people never heard of cyber fraud? Because I know that it was fashionable for some years for Americans to complain they'd been the victim of identity theft. You must have heard this, people. Many, many people talking about the horrors of identity theft. And here we have election where all of the great and good are telling identity theft. That's a conspiracy. That can't happen. It's just another example of this Schrodinger's cat mode that the elite live in. Oh yes. A few days ago, I spoke of the author Larry Correia, who was formerly an accountant. And he wrote yesterday, I noticed yesterday that I was having lots of strangers show up to scream at me whenever I posted any information about election fraud, but they were all low information types just barfing up fact checks, which was basically whatever the news had just told them, but none of them had the basic knowledge of how fraud works to even sort of discuss any of the actual data. So I got curious and posted the following on Facebook. One quick question, only answer if you have worked in auditing, stats, fraud, investigations, or other data analysis type fields. In your entire career, have you ever seen a case that threw up this many flags that did not turn out to be fraud? Again, flags are not proof. They are merely anomalies which would cause an auditor to check. Nor am I claiming this is a scientific poll, though I bet I'm still more accurate than Nate Silver. There is, of course, a sampling bias, as I know many of these people in meat space and their resumes on this topic are killer, but it was also open to the public so anyone could comment, and it got shared 100 times. The consensus thus far is overwhelming. No. Not only no, but hell no. There have been a few hedging their bets, but they are still suspicious, and 0 saying that there is nothing wrong, like in every other single thread where I get screamed at by Dunning-Krugerrands. I'm not claiming this is an accurate sampling of every professional of this type in America, but is pretty telling. Let's go through some examples. Big Six Accounting for 4 years, number 4 Global Investment Bank, running the anti-fraud unit also for 4 years, no. That is to say, the no answers are that this is not an accident. Worked in immigration fraud for many years and currently an intel analyst at a different agency. Just the sheer number of statistical anomalies covered here and elsewhere raises so many flags. It's like all the coaches in the NFL started frantically tossing their challenge flags. Then there's the poll worker shenanigans in Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that tells me that the Democratic city machines in those states were going, oh, he's behind. Quick, find Biden more ballots. Here's another. 25 years investigating financial fraud and money laundering. Where there is smoke, there is fire. When you have this many unconnected witnesses saying the same, similar things, that is very strong corroboration, not evidence of made-up stories. Here's another. I was a CPA for 45 years and never saw anything as suspicious as this election. Another. 25 years of investigating white-collar crime, primarily complex Department of Defense contracting fraud. Something with this many allegations would absolutely deserve a very thorough preliminary investigation. The Hunter Biden situation would have already gotten an accepted referral to AUSA for grand jury subpoenas for records. From 18 years insurance work comp fraud investigator, this many red flags, I'd be able to retire on the billing, and so on and so on. And he has several dozens of these examples. But they went to the people in charge, remember, the New York Times. Let us know about this. They went to the people in charge, and you see any fraud? Do you know, you prepared to admit to any fraud? And they all said no. It's not as if they have any kind of vested interest in not being embarrassed or disgraced or imprisoned, say. Yeah. Let's see. From the Federalist. 5 historical trends that show it's utterly shocking if Trump lost in 2020. 1, 10 million more votes. Not since President Grover Cleveland's re-election campaign in 1888 has a sitting president won more votes the second time around and still lost. Yeah, he doesn't mention that the 1888 election was stolen. 2, 56% of Americans better off than in 2016. 3, nearly 30% enthusiasm gap favoring Trump. 4, more people thought neighbors were voting for Trump. And 5, Trump still has 53% approval. So, oh, yeah, there's the other business there of Joe Biden being a demonstrably worse candidate than even Hillary Clinton. Hillary managed to summon enthusiasm at her rallies. Joe Biden stood in an airplane hangar with a bunch of journalists and laptops with a very tight close-up on him and the podium. So you weren't able to see that it was an empty room. Let's see what Scott Adams has to say. Jeffrey Miller had tweeted, "Here's Jack Murphy live with the most accurate 2-minute explanation of this election I've ever heard." Scott Adams comments, "News abuse is a thing now." Scott Adams says, "Has there ever been a request before a federal judge asking for an order that the USPS maintain all images taken of mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, Nevada, Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona? They will be destroyed after 30 days, so we need to act now." Again, as I've been saying this week, let's look at the big picture here. And the big picture is one of the reasons that the Democrats don't want to get to the bottom of what happened on November 3rd. It's not merely that they will be proven to have stolen the election, and it's not merely that a lot of them will be indicted and some of them will go to jail for shenanigans beginning in 2016 and the ongoing coup attempt against Donald Trump. If what I suspect to be true, and what many people suspect to be true, that there has been massive voting fraud every 4 years in big Democratic-controlled cities for decades, this will completely destroy the legitimacy of all the Democratic presidents from the 1970s onwards. Terror House Press tweets, "I'd say I'm shocked that many of you have been gaslit into believing Biden won, but many of you also got gaslit into believing Trump didn't fulfill any of his 2016 campaign promises. So I'm not actually shocked, and you should just delete your accounts now." Again, from Quackocracy, PSA, we're at peak gaslighting right now. Ignore all corporate media, ignore all black pillars. They have to gaslight because they can't win. They're desperate because they're weak. They can't stop what's coming. A friend of mine sent me a video of Anderson Cooper, gay robot Anderson Cooper, with Gloria Vanderbilt's son, because he knows about the common people. Anderson Cooper does. And he had two people on talking about Trump's selfishness. Oh, that America first. No, it was all about Donald Trump first. Just the level of ignorance there, whether it's willful or not, I don't know. Anderson Cooper doesn't seem to understand that there are millions, perhaps tens of millions of Trump voters who are absolutely furious about what has happened. It's not just Trump. Jonathan Haidt has written about this, that if you're on what we will call, for want of a better term, the right, you are inundated with leftist propaganda, because that is the ocean in which we all swim. If you are on the left, you are isolated from messages from the right. There are firewalls there. You have no interest, first of all, about what these people are saying, and the New York Times and the Washington Post, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, et cetera, they aren't going to echo any of these voices. So you find yourself in a position where, you find out that Trump got, 71, 72 million votes, and you think, no, Trump is the one who cheated. It's not possible for Trump to have got that many votes. Let's see what this, okay, I still look pretty much the same as I did. It's not ideal, but it will do. Okay, let's check in with a J5 killer. Corey Lewandowski on Newsmax. We haven't dropped any lawsuits. CNN just writes whatever they want to write. We should stop buying into their demoralization campaigns. That's from Kitty Shackelford. A J5 killer comments, will you give in to their demoralization campaign and let yourself be pushed around, or will you hold your head high and keep punching? I've come to a view which is rather reflexive, I suppose, that without being proved otherwise, everything reported by the news organizations that I just mentioned is fake, that it is all fake. And I don't know whether I will ever regain any trust in the mainstream media. I suppose they could start by including at least one contrary voice in their stories. But no, they don't do that. Standard Order tweeted, fascinating how an inexplicable overnight pause in election results, followed by a drastic change in trend, was sufficient cause for international observers to declare the 2019 Bolivian election illegitimate, but not when it happens in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and 6 U.S. states. Well, they just resort to force. I reviewed last week Abigail Schreier's excellent book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And I mentioned that this was a very controversial book, and there had been efforts to suppress it. Well, it's gone farther than that. Ask Target tweets, yesterday we removed a book from Target based on feedback we received. We want to offer a broad assortment for our guests and are adding this book back to Target.com. We apologize for any confusion. Oh, I put the end of the story first. Target decided to remove Abigail Schreier's book from their shelves, from their website, because of a complaint by one woman. Let's see if this comes up here. Yes, Alexa B., who appears to be a Canadian. I'm not going to misgender this person. Okay, I'll just read this person's description on Twitter. Intersectional feminist, IT professional, too good at irony, a living cancel culture, she, her. And then there's a flag that I don't really recognize. Oh, it's the transgender flag. Okay. Again, I don't want to misgender her. But yeah. Oh, and this woman, she has something like 3,000 Twitter followers. You get one complaint, a major company, U.S. company, such as Target, they just yank it. Oh my God, we have some transgender person or some transgender ally. We got to move fast. Neil Monroe in Breitbart, the Twitter account for Target stores says that the $80 billion corporation will stop selling a book about transgenderism's harmful impact on young girls following a complaint from a single Twitter account. Target.com just made my book disappear. Schreier responded, does it bother anyone that woke activists and spineless corporations now determine what Americans are allowed to read? Some corporations and many pro-transgender groups have tried to block and hide the book from American readers. In July, for example, Schreier tweeted, Amazon explicitly bars ads for the book while granting ads to books that celebrate the medical transition of teen girls who suddenly decide they're trans. If you don't think that indicates that Amazon is a retailer with a strong opinion, I'm not sure what to say. I won't go on too long about Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, just to repeat that it is essential reading for all parents or would be parents. And take your children out of public schools. Private schools are no better. Schreier gives plenty of examples in her book. Homeschool your children if you can. That would be the message. But you should get her book because it is an eye-opener. And as they say, forewarned is forearmed. So, treason. If treason doth prosper, none dare call it treason, as the old tag has it. Let's see, Liz Sly. That's an unfortunate name. What's wrong with Elizabeth? People seem to like that name. It's a regal name. Liz Sly is the Washington Post or Bezos blog Beirut bureau chief covering Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and beyond. Okay. So she tweeted, U.S. officials have been lying to Trump and the American people about the true number of U.S. troops in Syria in order to deter him from withdrawing them, according to the outgoing Syria envoy. Trump thinks it's 200, and then there's two emojis of someone crying with laughter. I guess she got ratioed pretty hard. So she continued to be clear, I'm not implying this is actually funny. No, sure you're not, Liz. I use the weeping laugh because it is tragicomic. The joke is on Trump, who told so many lies for being so easily lied to by his officials. It's a tragedy that they think it's okay to lie to Americans. Your concern trolling is not fooling anyone, Liz. Okay to lie to Americans about the scope of their involvement in foreign wars, and it sets a very dangerous precedent. Oh dear, I responded, yes, you do. You think treason is funny. Moreover, you think the traitors will get away with it, which is even funnier to you. You are in for a rude awakening. I guess the big story this week in terms of the Trump administration is a wholesale clear out of people at the Department of Defense, from the Defense Secretary on down. And it seems to me that Trump is making sure, to the best of his ability, that there will be no military coup against him. We've heard that Gina Haspel, who has been rumored to be axed, has been frozen out of high-level intelligence briefings. Traders all the way down. This is from defenseone.com from Katie Bowe Williams. Yes, that's her name. The senior national security correspondent is Katie Bowe, not B-E-A-U, but B-O Williams. 4 years after signing the now infamous Never Trump letter condemning then presidential candidate Donald Trump as a danger to America, Retiring diplomat Jim Jeffrey is recommending that the incoming Biden administration stick with Trump's foreign policy in the Middle East. But even as he praises the president's support of what he describes as a successful realpolitik approach to the region, he acknowledges that his team routinely misled senior leaders about troop levels in Syria. We were always playing shell games to not make clear to our leadership how many troops we had there, Jeffrey said. The actual number of troops in Northeast Syria is a lot more than the roughly 200 troops Trump initially agreed to leave there in 2019. Trump's abruptly announced withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria remains perhaps the single most controversial foreign policy move during his first years in office. And for Jeffrey, the most controversial thing in my 50 years in government. You mean just so very controversial that the President of the United States says, this is a clusterfuck. Why are we here? What is the end game? 50 years takes us back to 1970 when Ronald Reagan removed the Marines from Beirut. The neocons were tearing their hair out and, slashing their wrists, at least figuratively. How dare he? How dare he? If you ever hear a neocon, from Project Lincoln or whatever, or what the Reagan Brigade, they're all liars. They're all liars. The neocons never trusted Ronald Reagan. The Beirut decision enraged them. His decision to negotiate with Gorbachev led to them, several of them accusing Reagan of being a traitor. Neocons lie. They always lie. That's all they do. Ana Cabrera tweeted, a senior administration official tells CNN that CIA Director Gina Haspel has been iced out of an intelligence meeting that was take place at the White House Friday that included President Trump, Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, and other top intelligence officials. Bill Kristol responded, I am alarmed. Well, Bill Kristol's being alarmed is the health of the American nation and the American people, because Bill Kristol is about war, all the time. For what purpose? To what end? That's on a need-to-know basis. We have a plan. What is that plan? It will be revealed or not be revealed at our discretion. But in the meantime, we need to bomb foreigners. Also, the ones that survive, we need to invite them to our countries and hope that they don't hold the grudge. That sounds really logical, doesn't it? Let's see. All the Spurgs are in house tonight. Old times. Kyle's Jaw says, Israeli nukes protect the Jews and Israel is their safe space. Dennis Dale says, how dare you? Oh, okay. Max Vitriol says, it is not a bad imitation, but needs a bit of work. You see, when the chats, the individual submissions to the chat come through, often they scroll up so fast that it's difficult to know what people are arguing about. I don't want to talk about circumcision. I consider it to be a boring subject. Alex DeLarge says the Catholic Church bans circumcision. No, it does not ban circumcision. In fact, January the 1st in the Catholic Church was, until Vatican II, celebrated as the feast of the circumcision. Oh, okay, let's see. Do we have anything else germane here? Oh, Richard Spencer. Oh, God, I have no interest in Richard Spencer whatsoever. That guy's still around? Judah P. Benjamin. Yes, I know who Judah P. Benjamin was. He was a Jew who had several high positions in the Confederate States of America. After the end of the Civil War, he moved to London, where he became one of the top barristers and legal scholars in the country. A remarkable man. Okay, so let's talk about Cherchez la Femme. Boris Johnson's advisor, Dominic Cummings, arrives home with a bottle of champagne after carrying his belongings out of number 10, following claims he briefed against Boris Johnson's fiancée, Carrie Simons. After a week of turmoil, the Prime Minister told his most senior advisor to go with immediate effect in a bid to end the toxic rows at number 10 Downing Street. Lee Cain, who announced his resignation as Mr. Johnson's Director of Communications on Wednesday after Carrie Simons thwarted his promotion to Chief of Staff, was also sent home. It was claimed last night that Johnson had accused the pair of Vote Leave campaign veterans of briefing against his fiancée. In a terse 45-minute meeting, he is reported to have shown them incriminating text messages which had been forwarded to his fiancée. The explosive claims were denied by number 10. Yeah. So Nigel Farage, he commented that he never liked Dominic Cummings, but Dominic Cummings was a pro-Brexit, and his departure at this point, when Brexit is still up in the air, is, well, worrying. So who is Carrie Simons? Okay. She was born March 17th, 1988, which makes her 32 years old. I'm looking at a picture of her on Wikipedia. I'd say she's a plain-looking woman. According to Wikipedia, she is a British political activist, conservationist, and the fiancée of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson. She is the first unmarried partner of a Prime Minister to reside in 10 Downing Street. She works as a senior advisor to ocean conservation charity Oceana. She was born to Matthew Simons, co-founder of The Independent, and Josephine McAfee, a lawyer working for that newspaper. Her paternal grandfather was John Bevan, Baron Ardwick, at one time editor of the Daily Herald, and later during the 1970s, a Labour Party member of the European Parliament, and her paternal grandmother was Anne Simons, a BBC World Service journalist. She grew up in southwest London and attended Godolphin and Latimer School, an independent day school for girls. She went on to the University of Warwick, where she studied art history and theatre studies, completing her degree in 2009. In 2009, she joined the Conservative Party as a press officer. She worked at Conservative campaign headquarters and later campaigned for Boris Johnson in the 2010 London Conservative Party mayoral selection. She has also worked for Conservative MPs Sajid Javid as a media special advisor and John Whittingdale. She became head of the Conservative Party's communications in 2018, but left that position later that year, taking up a job in public relations for Oceana. It was reported that she was asked to leave her post as Director of Communications after sources claimed party chiefs had said her performance was poor, and questions were raised over significant unjustified expenses claims. These accusations were, however, rejected by other sources as being a smear campaign based around rumors allegedly spread by Johnson's political strategist, Linton Crosby. She has been described as a passionate animal rights defender and is patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation. She reportedly began an affair with Boris Johnson, then Foreign Secretary, in 2018 while he was still married to his second wife, Marina Wheeler. In July 2019, Johnson became Prime Minister and both he and Simons officially moved into 10 Downing Street. The following month, she was barred from entering the United States as her visa application was rejected due to a previous visit to Somaliland. Why on earth would she go to Somaliland, which the U.S. considers to be part of immigration-restricted Somalia? On August 16, 2019, she made her first public appearance since entering 10 Downing Street when she addressed what she called the, quote, gigantic climate crisis, unquote. Concerns over the influence of Simons over the Prime Minister were raised in January 2020, when it came to light that Simons received briefs from animal rights activists just before government came to pull a planned cull on badgers in Derbyshire. An association representing farmers, the National Farmers Union, asserted that this meeting and Simons' influence played a key role in the government ignoring scientific advice in favor of retaining the cull. According to The Guardian, a judicial review has been granted permission to examine how the decision was reached. On February 29th of this year, Simons and Johnson announced that they became engaged in late 2019 and were expecting a baby. Their son, Wilfred Laurie Nicholas Johnson, was born on April 29th at University College Hospital in London. Simons is a practicing Catholic and had Wilfred baptized into the Catholic Church. Simons was previously in a long-term relationship with British political journalist Harry Cole, who is political editor of The Sun, having previously been deputy political editor of The Mail on Sunday. He was once voted the 28th most influential man in Britain. Okay, the reason I brought this up is not just cherchez la femme. You know, it's always the woman. Who voted for Carrie Simons to be Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Well, nobody, actually. And I like this business about engaged, fiance. So get married already. Why haven't you gotten married already? Boris Johnson was married twice before, and he had two quite high-quality wives. These marriages fell apart because of his incessant philandering. And I suspect that Carrie Simons has the whip hand over Boris because it would be simply too embarrassing for him to get rid of her. But it is a shameful thing for a man to be afraid of his wife, or in this case, not even his wife, his girlfriend, that she cracks the whip at 10 Downing Street. And the Daily Mail had a fascinating graph here of the Brexit boys. On the one hand, you've got Dominic Cummings, Commission's comms chief Lee Kane. They're both gone. Various other people. So Dominic Cummings is married to the commissioning editor of The Spectator magazine, Mary Wakefield. Chief Office Minister Michael Gove is married to a prominent journalist. So the face of Number 10 Briefings, Allegra Stratton, is married to the editor of the political editor of The Spectator, James Forsyth. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, was best man at his wedding. So what you see this alliance like this between journalism and government. And if you wonder why journalism is no more adversarial as it once was, it's because these people are all sleeping with each other, and they're all married to each other, and they're all dependent upon each other. Carrie Simons, she may be a delightful woman, but she was a woman over the age of 30, not particularly attractive, but she got her power the old-fashioned way, by sleeping with the boss. But I suspect I wouldn't have to look very hard to find many stories celebrating her as some sort of feminist icon, in the same way that Michelle Obama obtained her power and influence, such as they are, by marrying the boss. Hillary Clinton, she could have struck out on her own. Could she not? Ivy League grad, apparently sharp as a tack. What did she do? She got her power the old-fashioned way, by marrying the boss. Some things never change. So we're going to talk about the other big disaster of 2020, which of course is the COVID-19 hysteria. And in approximately 10 minutes, I'm going to begin talking about David Mikish's book, Study of Stanley Kubrick, American filmmaker. So hang on for that. Donald Trump. This is from the Daily Mail. President Donald Trump appeared publicly for the first time in 8 days Friday for an event billed as an update on Operation Warp Speed and used it to threaten to refuse to send a new COVID vaccine to millions of Americans because of a political feud with New York's Democratic governor. Well, that's one way to put it. The president came out into the Rose Garden 26 minutes late and called his coronavirus response the single greatest mobilization in U.S. history. The number of people in hospital from COVID as he spoke was estimated to be 67,000. 153,000 people were diagnosed with it Thursday. I'll just break in to say that you remember during the second debate when Joe Biden said that there were going to be 400,000 Americans dead of COVID-19 by the end of the year. People better start dying fast or faster because this prediction is going to look ridiculous. It already looks ridiculous. Trump said that a COVID vaccine would be available to the general public, except for New York, where he is feuding with Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo, the Love Gov, dishing it 24/7. The state has a population of 19.5 million. Quote, as soon as April, the vaccine will be available to the entire general population, with the exceptions of places like New York State, where, for political reasons, the governor decided to say, I don't think it's good politically. I think it's very bad from a health standpoint. He wants to take his time with the vaccine. He doesn't trust where the vaccine is coming from. He doesn't trust the fact that it is this White House, this administration. So we won't be delivering it to New York until we have authorization to do so. And it pains me to say that. Governor Cuomo will have to let us know when he is ready for it. Otherwise, we can't be delivering it to a state that won't be giving it to its people immediately. And I know many. I know the people of New York very well. I know they want it, so the governor will let us know, unquote. He was referring to Cuomo's comments on ABC's Good Morning America Monday when he called the news of Pfizer's breakthrough on a potential vaccine good news, bad news. The good news is that the Pfizer tests look good and we'll have a vaccine shortly. The bad news is it's about 2 months before Joe Biden takes over, and that means this administration is going to be implementing a vaccine plan. Oh, vaccine, not a Trump vaccine. No, not a Trump vaccine. Do you know that this vaccine has to be stored at minus 91 degrees Fahrenheit? Does that sound very scalable to you? It does not sound very scalable to me. This is from Business Insider. Pfizer CEO cashed out 60% of his stock on the same day the company unveiled the results of its COVID-19 vaccine trial. To go back to James Burnham and the Machiavellians, there comes a point when the reigning elite decides, and Burnham's far more elegant than this, just to hell with it. Impropriety? No. I don't even know what impropriety means. What I understand is money in my pocket. That's what I understand. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla sold 62% of his stock on the same day the company announced its experimental COVID-19 vaccine succeeded in clinical trials. The vaccine announcement sent Pfizer's shares soaring almost 15% on the day. He sold 132,508 shares in the company at an average price of $41.94 a share, or $5.6 million total, according to filings registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. No, nothing untoward about that at all. And it would be a conspiracy theory to suggest that there's anything untoward about Bourla's behavior. This is from Charlie Spearling at Breitbart. Dr. Anthony Fauci expressed concerns Thursday about an independent society trying to fight the coronavirus, arguing Americans should just listen to public health officials. Quote, each of our countries, and he's referring to the United Kingdom, have that independent spirit where we don't want to be told what to do. Well, I understand that, but now is the time to do what you're told. Fauci spoke at the National Cathedral's 2020 Ignatius Forum about facing a second wave of the virus in the fall and the winter. Aren't we up to like the third or the fourth wave by now? We're not done. We still need to implement public health measures in a very intense way. Fauci said he loved the federalist nature of the United States, but indicated it was problematic. States had different approaches to fighting the virus. Quote, "We had too much individual approaches towards how we were going to handle the outbreak, so our baseline never came down to the low level where we wanted it to be," unquote. Yes, again, apparently just a question of willpower, showing that virus what's what and who's who. And if COVID-19 doesn't like it, well, let's go out into the back and we'll sort this out. Okay? Fauci said there would continue to be a core of people who would never take a vaccine, but it was important to combat misinformation to the larger public about the importance of vaccines. He said it would be problematic if up to 50% of Americans refused to take it. He said, "I think that there has been an anti-authority component to this. We had anti-vax people don't like to be told to be vaccinated. Scientists are often perceived as authoritarian." Oh, are they now? I thought scientists were people who sat at desks or wore white coats, and they performed experiments testing hypotheses and generated theories based on that, which were presented authoritarian. No, it is only this year that scientists have been perceived as authoritarian because these latrine wallahs now believe that they are royal, and it would be lèse-majesté to even doubt their prescriptions. From Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News, airlines are likely to require passengers to sign up for a health pass, which includes a digital certificate of vaccination against COVID-19 before allowing them to fly, according to a new report. The system would be similar in nature to that being considered by Ticketmaster, who was revealed earlier this week are considering making customers prove they've had the vaccine or a negative coronavirus test before allowing them to purchase tickets. Ticketmaster later clarified that a final decision on such measures would be up to event organizers, but that they were still mulling over the implementation of the system. Now, according to a new report by Axios, airlines are likely to follow the same model. Quote, 3 global alliances representing 58 airlines are pushing governments to allow widespread COVID-19 testing of passengers instead of existing quarantine restrictions that they argue are ineffective and have killed travel demand. The bottom line, no health pass, no admittance, and perhaps no flying. Oh, and a reader or listener sent me this to me. It's a form. It's a blank form, which people can fill in, PDF. Application to court if danger to public health, Canada, Province of British Columbia, Form 3, pursuant to Section 49 of the Public Health Act. This is the application of medical health officer of, and then your name, your health authority, to the Province of British Columbia. I'm applying for orders that name of person be detained at, name of facility for terms of detention and expiry of order, and that name of person submit to an examination, preventative measures, or any other thing necessary to ensure that the person will not be a danger to public health. A warrant that name of person be apprehended and transported to name of place. I make this application with the approval of the provincial health officer as evidenced by the document attached, which then forms part of this application on the basis of my belief that name of person is an infected person who, if not detained, may be a danger to public health. The grounds for my belief are followed, dated, etc., etc. Oh, so in my province, I guess Dr. Bonnie Henry now has the power to put people like me in a concentration camp. If I'm spotted, walking down the street not wearing a mask, perhaps. We don't have mandatory mask rules in British Columbia, not yet. We've never had one. Well, except on public transportation. and except at Walmart and a bunch of other places. But they may be coming. The more it becomes obvious that the fatality rate of COVID-19 is exceedingly low, the greater the control by Latrine Wallace. Funny how that works, isn't it? What is going on in the chat? I hope we're not still talking about Dennis Prager. Okay. What? I don't. I can't follow this. Oh, dude, sorry. We're talking about marriage here. Okay. I always wonder when I look at the chat, and it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I always wonder whether what I'm saying is boring to the people who are listening to me, or alternatively, they just have these things they have to get out which are more important than what I'm talking about on the show. I suppose it will remain a eternal mystery. Anonymous professor, please, KMG, don't talk about my marriage. I don't know who you are. Obviously, you're the anonymous professor, and I don't know anything about your marriage. Not that. Who is Dennis Prager? Says Jonathan Paul. Come on. I know that professor used to listen to Luke Ford's show, and he was always talking about Dennis Prager. Okay, we're going to have a look at lockdown skeptics, and then Alex Berenson's Twitter account, and then we're on to the book club. This is from Will Jones today. Treasury, that would say the British Treasury made no forecast for lockdown 2.0. SAGE, that's the group of scientific experts who are advising or pretty much taking control of the British government, says it's not their job to take into account the economic impact of lockdown. It's the Treasury's job. Why then has the Treasury now admitted that it produced no forecasts in the run-up to the second lockdown? Why did SAGE on September 21st claim they were in hand? These were the questions MPs put to Treasury officials on Wednesday. Now, we can't be held responsible for the consequences of our dictates. Why does Europe's second wave have almost no excess deaths? Dr. Claire Craig had tweeted with graphs of Europe COVID cases and European excess deaths versus a baseline. We are in a false positive pseudo epidemic. Victoria, that would be in Australia. Victorian lockdown resembled 1970s East Germany more than a liberal democracy. A friend and lifelong Melburnian writes of his despair. I'm increasingly sad about the prospects for Victoria in the next decade. The political leadership this year has highlighted a number of trends built up over some 20 years under Labour governments with characteristics to the left of their federal and interstate counterparts and not dealt with by the few weak state coalition governments. It is now evident that Victorian lockdown resembled 1970s East Germany more than a liberal democracy, and most Victorians seem happy with that. The public service seems stuffed at the top with overpaid and sinicured people whose values and principles are far from what public service should be. This is evident in all sorts of ways that line up with the current government's totalitarian agenda of emergency legislation, removing basic liberties, bypassing cabinet, largely sidelining parliament, setting up a pathetically tame inquiry to investigate, ignoring human rights protections, destruction of the country fire authority, destruction of the hardwood timber industry threatened, etc., not to mention meekly signing on to China's Belt and Road influence. While the lockdown-induced anger may achieve a change of government in 2022, unraveling the mess is likely to be nearly impossible. At the least, it will require the reinstitution of values of public sector independence and robust accountability mechanisms. There is not enough widespread pushback, and while there is critique across most of the media, it is muted. Well, excuse me. The situation in England, and I'll have to point out that there are separate regimes for COVID in Scotland and Wales. I would say that, again, that England is close to a revolutionary situation. They're in a pre-revolutionary situation. And if Boris Johnson, as appears possible, perhaps even likely, attempts to outlaw Christmas, I seriously think there could be a widespread insurrection, even a revolution in England. Now, people will say, well, the polls say 70+% say they agree with the lockdown. This is meaningless because very few of these people have any kind of passionate commitment to it. And these people, of course, are getting paid to stay at home for the most part. Whereas the people on the other side have a very strong, passionate commitment because, well, they're not being paid to stay at home, or they realize the insanity of this, how it is gravely damaging their own lives and those of their family, friends, community, etc. And again, Pareto, or the Machiavellians was mentioned at the top of the show. I will mention Pareto again, the Pareto principle, 80-20. Again, the American Revolution, only 20% of the colonists supported rebellion against the crown, and only 20% of those 20% were willing to take up arms, and 20% of 20% is 4%, and sometimes that is all that it takes. Let's see what Alex Berenson has to say. Michigan's monthly death data provides a look at the terrible impact of the lockdowns. From June to September 2020, 33,549 residents died, about 2,300 more than the previous year, a 7% increase. Because COVID, right? No. Michigan classified 784 of the deaths of COVID, and it is very unlikely to have missed many or even few COVID deaths because Michigan aggressively matches death certificates with COVID test registries. Further, reported deaths from COPD and pneumonia actually fell by about 250 from 2019 to 2020. Those are the two categories where unreported COVID deaths would be most likely. Meanwhile, cancer deaths also fell, and heart disease deaths, the biggest category, rose slightly. In other words, COVID deaths are not being hidden. These other deaths are unrelated to COVID. So, who are the extra 1,500 plus people who died over the summer? What did they die of? Well, the categories Michigan reports monthly make up roughly 45% of all deaths. What are the other big categories? Suicide, overdose, accident, alcoholism, dementia, and Alzheimer's, homicide. Deaths that have one thing in common: they are the products of or are worsened by despair and loneliness. Unfortunately, Michigan doesn't break those out on a monthly basis, but they must account for almost the entire remaining increase. The math is simple and brutal. And one day, long after the CNNs have forgotten COVID and moved on to shark attacks or another Woodstock documentary, we will get a full picture of lockdown deaths this year, and we will regret the choices we've made. Well, here's hoping. The madness ends quickly. And of course, the public health establishment is dead set against Donald Trump having a second term, because Donald Trump will bring this to an end in the United States. Well, I suppose states like Michigan and New York and New Jersey can continue to commit social and economic suicide if they like, but California perhaps as well. But it's going to be difficult for those states when they see the other states, the non-crazy states, thriving as all of their businesses die. I don't know how long that they could keep that up with Trump in a second term. We're on to the book club here, 8 minutes late. And the book is by David Mickish, and it is called Stanley Kubrick, American filmmaker. It is a book that came out this year. And let's see, let's find out who David Mickish is. He seems to be a heavy hitter intellectually. He's on the honors college faculty at the University of Houston. His most recent book, A Slow Reading in a Hurried Age, came out from Harvard Belknap in 2013. It was featured on NPR and the New York Times. Other recent books are The Annotated Emerson and The Art of the Sonnet, as well as Who Was Jacques Derrida and A New Handbook of Literary Terms, both from Yale University Press. His book on Saul Bellow, Bellow's People, appeared from Norton in 2015. He's a columnist for Tablet magazine, where he writes regularly on subjects of Jewish interest, from politics and culture to literature. He's also written for the New Republic, the Jewish Daily Forward, the New York Times, the New Statesman, Huffington Post, and other publications. Now, this book is part of a series, Jewish Lives, which is a partnership of Yale University Press and the Leon D. Black Foundation. It's described as a prize-winning series of interpretive biography designed to explore the many facets of Jewish identity. Individual volumes illuminate the imprint of Jewish figures upon literature, religion, philosophy, politics, cultural and economic life, and the arts and sciences. Subjects are paired with authors to elicit lively, deeply informed books that explore the range and depth of the Jewish experience from antiquity to the present. And I see that something like about 40 books have already been published in the series, from everyone to Rabbi Akiva to Barbara Streisand, and including Harvey Wilk, Moses Proust, and Yitzhak Rabin. And there are about another 20 titles which are forthcoming. That's curious to me, because Stanley Kubrick was a Jew. His mother and father were Jews, immigrants from Europe. So in terms of blood and by Mosaic law, Kubrick was a Jew. But I don't know what is so particularly Jewish about him. I'm well familiar with Kubrick's life work. His sensibility has often been said to be Jewish, but it seems his Jewish sensibility seems to be one which has been superannuated. That is to say that he doesn't show much in common with what is, current Jewish sensibilities. Kubrick was far more thoughtful, far more careful, far less willing to get involved in politics. Kubrick had almost no interest in politics, and his political engagement was practically zero. Mickish details how after Dr. Strangelove came out, the anti-nuke people made a serious effort to recruit him to their cause, and he simply wasn't interested. Not interested, Mickish explains, is why Kubrick was not bar mitzvahed. He simply wasn't interested. He took no part in Jewish observances in his life. He loved Christmas, as Mickish points out. And his third wife, who he was married to for 40 years, and he had 2 children with, Christiane Harlan, was a German woman who was, well, for want of a better phrase, Nazi filmmaking royalty. Kubrick also, he loved guns. He loved collecting guns, and he loved shooting guns. And I don't really think that is much of a Jewish interest. I'm sure there are Jews who love guns. Now, a Kaddish was said at Kubrick's funeral ceremony, but that doesn't prove to me much one way or the other. I've read Emilio D'Alessandro's memoir of working for Kubrick for decades, and Kubrick was very pleased to accept the invitation of Emilio D'Alessandro to be present at his son's confirmation in the Catholic Church. And you see the picture of him with a big smile on his face. I would say, in one sense, Kubrick was very Jewish in that he was a hustler. And I don't mean this, in any kind of pejorative way. at all. That I suppose that we all know the story of how Kubrick got into the artistic business, which when he was 17 years old, this was the day after Franklin Delano Roosevelt had died in 1945. And so what he did was, here's the story from the book. President Roosevelt died on April 12, 1945, 9 months before Stanley Kubrick graduated from high school. The next day, Stanley walked past a news kiosk displaying the headline, FDR dead. Stanley coached the news dealer into a dejected posture and snapped a photo, which he promptly brought to the offices of Look magazine. Look's photo editor, Helen O'Brien, took a chance on young Kubrick, and before long, he was a staff photographer. Still, only 17, Kubrick had snagged what he later called a fantastically good job at Look, and he would stay there for the next 4 years. Meanwhile, he was having trouble getting into college. My father, who was an alumni sick of New York University Uptown, took me to see the dean. Nothing worked, Kubrick remembered, but skipping college turned out to be a huge plus. Photography gave me a quick education in the way things happen in the world, Kubrick later said. Kubrick's father was a physician, and he very much wished for his son to follow in his footsteps. Stanley Kubrick had no interest in this whatsoever. He had very little interest in school. That for much of the 12 years that he spent in school, he simply refused to go. He wasn't interested, he said. He found it boring. And his mother supported him in this. His mother, Gertrude, his father's name was Jacques or Jack. And this is one of the things that I have noticed many times. There's a pattern here that few men become successful in life without their mother's love. You often see this going too far, and some people would argue that it went too far with Kubrick. That if you tell a boy that he is a genius, that he's going to conquer the world, and maybe you tell him that he's handsome and charming on top of it, that you end up with a monster. I don't think that Kubrick was a monster. He certainly knew what he wanted. I think Leonard Bernstein would be a good example of the syndrome which that I have just described. Mickish relates in his book that Stanley Kubrick, of course, did not like to do homework. And so if you're a charming fellow, and Kubrick was charming, well, I'll read again. Stephen Marcus, later a literature professor at Columbia, was Stanley's classmate at William Howard Taft High School, where Kubrick asked day after day to copy Marcus's homework. When Marcus finally asked Stanley, "Why aren't you doing your homework?" Kubrick responded, "Well, I'm not interested." Stanley just didn't respond to education by command. If he liked something, he threw himself into it. If not, he was hopeless. Along with photography and chess, movies possessed Stanley. He attended Lowe's and the RKO religiously, often skipping school to see a double feature. This was the early 40s, a shining summit for Hollywood movies. Among Kubrick's favorites for those years, he told Cinema magazine in 1963, were Wells's Citizen Kane, William Wellman's Roxy Hart, Olivier's Henry V, and Edward Klein's The Bank Dick with W.C. Fields. Stanley liked jazz, too, and drummed in a band fronted by a teenage Edie Gourmet, a Taft classmate. Edie Gourmet became a very popular singer in America in the 50s and 60s and through to the 1970s. Stanley graduated Taft with a 70 average, too low to get into college in the GI Bill years. He was no slacker, though. He knew what he wanted. Stanley had a demonic belief in his own capacity. Demons were driving him. Nothing could stand in his way, said Marcus. Michael Herr, who knew the grown-up Kubrick, concurred, "You'd have to be Herman Melville to transmit the full strength of Stanley's will." So Kubrick worked for Look magazine for 4 years. And there's a lot of good pictures in this book and you get an idea of the type of people that Kubrick met through his work with Look magazine. Betsy von Furstenberg, Aaron Copland, Oscar Levant, Leonard Bernstein, many famous people. Kubrick decided that he wanted to make films, and he got fed up with Look magazine because he was getting paid $150 a week. That wage never went up, and he became bored and dissatisfied, and he decided he was going to make his own films. That he saw thousands of films, and he often found himself thinking, I could do better than that. From the book. A friend reported that Kubrick sometimes read the newspaper in the movies when he got bored by what was on screen. The young Kubrick taught himself how to make movies, a rare thing among major directors. He read Pudovkin on film editing and Stanislavski on acting. In those days, there were no film schools, remembered Gerald Fried, who scored his early films. We had to learn by going to movies. Our discussions after seeing them were primarily listening to Stanley, kind of smirking at the tasteless sentimentality of most pictures. As an antidote to Hollywood sentiment, Kubrick had also seen all of the foreign films at the Museum of Modern Art, most of them more than once. Now he was ready. In 1950, the 21-year-old Kubrick made his first movie, Day of the Fight, a 12.5-minute newsreel about a boxer named Walter Cartier. Kubrick's high school friend Alex Singer worked the camera. Kubrick made Day of the Fight for about $3,900 and sold it to RKO Pathé for $4,000. This was much less money than he and Singer had expected, but still, he was elated. 9 months after Day of the Fight, Kubrick quit Look, determined to make it as a director. He went on to make another short for RKO Pathé, The Flying Padre, about a priest in New Mexico who visits his flock by airplane. Meanwhile, he searched for cash to make a feature film. Kubrick shot his first feature, Fear and Desire, in Southern California in early 1951 after raising $10,000, mostly from his uncle, Martin Perveler, who owned a string of pharmacies in L.A. Perveler demanded that Kubrick gave him a percentage on all his future films, but when Stanley refused to give him the money anyway, he gave him the money away. Paul Mazursky, who was a young friend of Kubrick and later became a famous director himself, who acted in the movie, remembered driving with Kubrick to visit Perveler. He needed another $5,000 to finish the film, and he says, I'm going to get the money from him no matter what. I can tell you that right now. And he spat at the windshield from inside the car. I'll never forget that. He got the money. Yeah. Henny Youngman, the great Jewish comedian. I suppose, before your time, although, if you've seen Goodfellas, you will have seen his act. He was once asked by a young man who wanted to get into show business what the most important thing was, and Henny Youngman said, "Nem die Geld," which is Yiddish for get the money. Kubrick just had an unshakable desire in his own worth, an unshakable desire in his own talent, such that by the time that he made A Clockwork Orange, there's a very telling moment when Alex is at the Chelsea drugstore looking at all the new albums, and you see the soundtrack album for 2001 there, and Alex Cox, the filmmaker who made Repo Man and Sid Nancy, pointed out that by that time, Kubrick was influenced only by himself. It's really a remarkable thing when you read about how Kubrick came to be a filmmaker, because it was just unheard of at the time for someone to raise money and say, I'm going to make a film. I've taught myself how to shoot. And Kubrick taught himself to light and to shoot and to edit and sound, everything. And people who worked at him, the people at the top of the industry in years to come, were simply amazed that he seemed to know better than they did their own jobs. Kubrick was of the opinion that if you want something done well, do it yourself. And Kubrick famously drove the people who worked for him to their limit. But as Mikesh points out in his book, it was admitted that on the set of a movie, the people who were angry with him because of being worked, well, to death sometimes. Poor Ken Adam, Kubrick nearly killed Ken Adam, the great art director. Nobody worked harder than Kubrick did himself, which is it's a tremendous inspiration to other people. But Kubrick deciding, I'm going to make some shorts. These don't exist anymore, but it used to be when you went to the movies for your nickel. You got a feature film, maybe a double feature, and you got some cartoons, and you got previews, and you got newsreels. Here's what's going on in the latest news from Berlin, this sort of thing. Or here's the latest Paris fashions. Or here's a story about a priest in New Mexico who has the largest parish in the United States, and so he uses an airplane. He flies himself around, right? That sort of thing. You used to get a lot of stuff when you went to the movies. So he's gonna start out on newsreels, and then he's going to make a feature film. Now, Fear and Desire. Let's see. Mikesh describes it. Released in 1953, Fear and Desire is a deadly serious Conrad-style tale about 4 soldiers stranded behind enemy lines in an unnamed war. Years later, Kubrick mercilessly derided his first feature film and tried to keep it from being shown. He said to an interviewer, quote, "I wasn't satisfied to just make an interesting film. I wanted it to be a very poetic and meaningful film. It was a little like the Thurber story about the midget who wouldn't take the base on balls and decided to swim." That's good. It opened at the Guild Theater in New York, and it was pretty apparent it was terrible, unquote, although Tom Wolfe seemed to be impressed by it at the time. Fear and Desire was unavailable for decades. For over half a century. You could get an nth generation, dupe. Some of these showed up on YouTube, but they were unwatchable. Remarkably, a few years ago, Fear and Desire, plus his Kubrick's first, the shorts that he made were released by Masters of Cinema in Britain, and they were released in the United States as well. I never thought that I would live to see that happen. Fear and Desire is certainly for completists, but Kubrick never went to film school, and he wasn't groomed by the studio system. And I think this is key to his success artistically, because there was no one there to tell him this is how we do things, or this is what you must do. Don't do that, do this instead. Kubrick thought that, why can't I do it? I'm going to make better pictures than anyone, and I'm going to make them the way that I want to make them, because, he was not constrained by received wisdom. It's an odd thing about this book that Mikesh begins by telling us that, Kubrick's films are aloof, they're cold, and there's no catharsis, and there's no tearjerkers. And then later, a few chapters later, he seems to walk back on this, and it's just, no, I don't think his films are cold. I think that there's a distance. There's a distance there, and this distance you see in great art. If you want catharsis, I don't know. If you want tearjerkers, let's look at Barry Lyndon. How about the scene when Barry's son, Brian, is killed, and his death scene, and the funeral, or the very last scene of Barry Lyndon, where Barry's wife is signing over the note of the money that was paid to Barry to leave Britain forever. And you see the haunted, stricken look in her eyes as she's holding the quill over the check. And you see Lord Bullingdon very anxiously looking at her. He's disturbed because, and you realize from this, that Barry Lyndon was a big dummy who wasted a fine family fortune, as it says in the film, but she still loves him. She can't stop loving him. And Mickish is very good pointing out one of the themes that you see in Kubrick again and again is people doing things that they shouldn't be doing and expecting results other than what they get. Kubrick was an extraordinarily intelligent man, and he faced a dilemma, which is that he wanted to make intelligent films. He didn't want to make sentimental films. He didn't want to make films such as everyone else was making, but he didn't want to make art films. He wanted to make films that were art, but he wanted to make films that made money. Eyes Wide Shut, which is his last film, of course. Sadly, or disappointingly to me, Mickish doesn't really get into any of the rumors about this film, such as that Kubrick died before it was completed and that Sidney Pollack, who has a role in the film, actually put together the edit that was shown to the world. He doesn't get into any of that. But the screenwriter, Frederick Raphael, I read Raphael's memoir of working with Stanley Kubrick, and it's clear that Raphael hated Kubrick because Raphael was a well-known novelist, a Jewish novelist, and a scriptwriter. Raphael, unlike Kubrick, seemed to have very much a chip on his shoulder about being Jewish. Now, Eyes Wide Shut is based on a novel by Schnitzler, a Traumnovelle, a dream novel, a dream story. And it's all about Jews in Vienna between the wars. And Kubrick decided that this film wasn't going to be about Jews, that it was going to be set in New York City, and it was going to be about a man called Dr. Bill Harford and his wife. And this very much irritated or enraged Raphael. But Kubrick decided that if he literally rendered a Schnitzler's novel on the screen, people would say, oh, this is a Jewish film. And in making a Bill Harford not Jewish, then it becomes more universal. I'm reminded of Bob Fosse in Star 80, that Dorothy's husband turned murderer, was a Jew, and he wore very prominently a Star of David on his chest. You can see it in the pictures. Well, Bob Fosse had him wear a medallion in the film, but it was not a Star of David. And the critic, John Simon, roasted him for this. But I can see what Fosse was trying to do here. He was trying to turn this from a Jewish story to a universal story. There's also the matter that if Paul, the husband, had been shown with this very prominent Star of David, he would be accused of anti-Semitism. In the same way, in Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street, our protagonist was a Jew. But in the film, he's not a Jew. He's Leo DiCaprio. And I think he made this choice for the same reasons as Scorsese and Kubrick did. The analysis, Mickish's analysis of Kubrick's films is quite good. I have to say, though, that he seems to nurse some sort of grudge against Kubrick's second wife, Ruth Sobotka, who was a ballet dancer and got into set design. And he accuses her of basically trying to hijack Kubrick's career and to suffocate him. And he attributes various things that happen in various films to be Kubrick getting back at Ruth Sobotka. I really don't see the evidence for this. I think that he makes too much of it. What he makes too little of is the fact that Eyes Wide Shut is based on something called, the dream novel. And I don't think that Eyes Wide Shut can be regarded as a realistic film. People talk about the artificiality of the orgy scene. There's a pretty good joke there, and let's see if I can bring it up here. That this is not, because the orgies don't look like this, and I think, how many orgies have you been to? How many people have ever been to an orgy? Mikish writes, Kubrick didn't live to see the disappointed reaction to Eyes Wide Shut, partly the fault of a teaser publicity campaign suggesting that it would be an intensely sexy movie. The attacks centered on the orgy scene, which critics mostly found antiquated and phony, with its glossy Helmut Newton-style nudes in high heels. They had perhaps expected real orgasms in a leather dungeon. Whose idea of an orgy is this? The Catholic Church's, one reviewer complained. But the orgy was supposed to be grandiose and frigid. Critic Lee Siegel grasped the point when he wrote that with the orgy, Kubrick wanted to show that sex without emotion is ritualistic, contrived, and enthralled to authority and fear. Compared with the everyday reality of sex and emotion, our fantasies of gratification are, yes, pompous and solemn in the extreme. But look, Bill Harford, he's heard of what orgies are. Everyone's heard of what orgies are. But, okay, so powerful people that Nick Nightingale tells them, oh, these people, you don't want to know about these people. They're just so very powerful. So Bill Harford has this idea in his head of incredibly powerful, secretive people. And they're putting on an orgy. So what would that look like? It seems obvious to me that much of Eyes Wide Shut is Bill Harford's dream or his imagination. I'll give you another example. That Dr. Harford, Dr. Bill, after he has been cuckolded, at least metaphorically, by his wife, he's enraged and he wants revenge. And what better way to have revenge than to have sex with another woman? And he spends most of the film attempting to have sex with women or dealing with women who are coming on to him. This is another dreamlike aspect of it. Why are all of these women suddenly coming on to Dr. Bill? Not in a, well, yeah, it'd be kind of interesting if, no, right now. So he's walking the streets in New York City, in Greenwich Village, and he runs into this young woman, and she's wearing a fake fur outfit with a hat, and she's a street hooker, and she gives him this, come on. And she's played by the actress Vanessa Shaw. So let's look at this street hooker who lives in a tiny, horrible little apartment, indicating that she doesn't earn very much money. She's not a call girl. She is a street hooker. But she is also the most beautiful woman in the world. And she is also intelligent and kind and thoughtful. Nope. Never happened. Never happened. This is just something that's going on in Bill Harford's mind. And I'm rather. But by the way, Lee Siegel's essay on Eyes Wide Shut is excellent. And if you're interested in Eyes Wide Shut, I highly recommend it. But no, as I say, I was disappointed by the fact that the rather obvious fact that Bill Harford is an unreliable narrator is not so much a narrator as what we're seeing through his eyes is actually what we're seeing through his mind or through his dreams. he goes through all of the films that Kubrick made, and he has a lot of interesting things to say about them, including, the making of them. People don't like to see movies where people are about to write with a feather. This is what he was told. And he made Barry Lyndon, and it didn't do all that well in the United States, but it eventually made a profit for Warner Brothers. Here's another example. Enough of war films, their death at the box office. Poison, said MGM's head of production, Doris Sherry, to the 27-year-old Kubrick in 1956. Kubrick and Jimmy, or James Harris, who was his production partner, were trying to get MGM interested in making Paths of Glory, Humphrey Cobb's 1935 novel about the French army in World War I. Paths of Glory was one of the few books that Kubrick had read during high school. He devoured Cobb's saga sitting in his father's waiting room while Jack Kubrick saw his patients. Kubrick wasn't drafted during the Korean conflict because he was married, but Harris was a vet, and now the two wanted to make a movie about war. Sherry wasn't biting. He'd been on the hook at MGM for the box office failure of John Huston's The Red Badge of Courage, and he wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. War movies were verboten in Sherry's lexicon, but he was impressed by the killing. Though the movie had flopped, losing the hefty sum of $130,000 for United Artists, it made several reviewers' top 10 lists. So Sherry told Harris and Kubrick, "We have a room full of properties we own. There must be something in there you boys want to do." Well, Kubrick made Paths of Glory, and it was not a success, although I suspect that whoever owns United Artists properties now, the amount of times it's been shown on television, the number of videos, DVDs, and Blu-rays of Paths of Glory that it started making, it went into profit quite a long time ago. Going back to Kubrick's Jewishness, there's Mikish makes an attempt here to try to convince us that Kubrick was frightened when he was filming Paths of Glory in Munich. And I don't really buy his story, and I'll explain why. That it has to do with Oktoberfest, that Kubrick was exposed to this, and he was frightened by this. Well, I'll give you a similar example. That when I was about 15 years old, I found myself in downtown Vancouver on a Friday night, and it was the day before the Grey Cup, which was being held in Vancouver that year. And the Grey Cup used to be played on Saturday. It's played on Sunday now, and they'd have a big parade on Saturday before the game, and all of these people would come from out of town. Thousands of people would come from out of town, and I found myself in downtown. It's dark, and it is full of thousands, just thousands of loud, drunk people. And I was scared. I was genuinely scared. And I think this was a situation that Kubrick had found himself in. Kubrick wasn't, I'll just read it here. Jan Harlan, who was Christiane Harlan's brother, became an executive producer on Kubrick's films. Son Manuel, his nephew Manuel, got involved. Kubrick liked to work with family. Let's see. Harlan was, in fact, Kubrick's girlfriend, this Christiane Harlan. Just as Harris guessed, Kubrick first saw her one night on German television and was bowled over. A few days later, he went to see her perform at a Kammerspiel theater in Munich. Fascinated, he then sought her out at a Red Cross benefit during Fasching, Munich's rowdy carnival season. He was not exactly a drunken ball person, Harlan remembered. Kubrick was the only one there without a costume. At a German carnival, you get real retro drunks, the lowest of the low. There was a river of pee. He felt very scared. Stanley never forgot it. Yeah, I don't think this is much to do with, Kubrick being afraid because he was a Jew amongst thousands of Germans. It was the type of Germans. Christiane Harlan had one notorious relative, her uncle Veit Harlan, director of Jud Zus, one of the Nazis' most famous propaganda films. Stanley and I come from such different, such grotesquely opposite backgrounds, Christiane told an interviewer. I think it gave us an extra something. I had an appalling, catastrophic background for someone like Stanley. For me, my uncle was great fun. He and my father planned to join the circus. They were acrobats. They threw me around. It was a complete clown's world. Nobody can imagine that you can know someone who is so guilty, so intimately, and yet not know. And Kubrick enjoyed Germany. Christiane remembered, though he was anxious about being there as a Jew so soon after the war. He especially liked her relatives, a noisy, well-dressed crowd, most of them theater and film people. They were showboats, and they looked and acted it, and I was a little embarrassed, she recalled. Stanley liked them because they were fun, real fun. My film star auntie was a Swede, Christina Söderbaum, and boy, she could drink you under the table. Söderbaum was one of the great Nazi film stars. Kubrick doesn't seem to be particularly put out about this. In fact, at one point, Kubrick was examining the possibility of filming one of Louis Ferdinand Céline's novels. He called Céline his favorite anti-Semite. You just see a detachment in Kubrick, a rigorous detachment, which is one of the things that makes his films so brilliant. But of course, Mikish goes into great detail about Kubrick's insistence on everything being in its place. There was no aspect of a set that he didn't have an intense interest in. And of course, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, Liorni pointed out that the bathroom of the final scene in the first part of Full Metal Jacket, Ermi said with amazement that it took 6 hours to set up the lighting for that scene. That, one of the things that you notice if you've ever seen a Kubrick film is just how good it looks and how you get sucked in immediately. And that's because Kubrick thought, I'm not going to settle for anything less than the best. Just being good enough was never good enough for Kubrick. Sadly, it meant that he made fewer and fewer films as he got older. But he ran into various reversals, such as the failure of a movie on Napoleon, or indirectly on Napoleon, leading to the death of his Napoleon project, in which he had slaved on for years. And Schindler's List came out while he was planning Aryan Papers, his own film about the Holocaust. But, and again, you could say Full Metal Jacket would have been a much more successful film if it had come out before Platoon. But Kubrick was never going to rush the completion of a film. There are very few errors that I could spot in this book. He does make a error about Hartman. He was not a lieutenant. He was a gunnery sergeant. And he talks about, Mikish discusses changes to the final scene of The Shining being removed. Other cuts to his films, quite substantial cuts, but he talks about the disastrous first screening of 2001 without mentioning that Kubrick cut about 20-25 minutes out of it after that screening, which I thought was a strange omission. But I like this book a great deal. That he has many hypotheses about what the films mean. And of course, that is one of the reasons why I and so many other people love Kubrick's films, is that you can just keep thinking about them, keep thinking about them, keep thinking about them. And they reveal so very much. One of the ideas that he brings up is that in The Shining, that it is Danny who brings the insanity, the murder to life, because Danny realizes that this is the only way that he can get rid of his father, and so that he and his mother can survive. And I thought that was quite an intriguing suggestion. If Stephen King has never gotten over Kubrick's version. He did his own version, on TV, and it's just the idea between. The difference between a journeyman and a genius is that King's complaints were, there's not enough about Indian burial ground in the movie. Ugh, Indian burial ground. Seriously? Oh, there's not enough about Jack Torrance's alcoholism. Yeah, well, alcoholism, I guess, is pretty important to you, Stephen King, because you were an alcoholic. But alcoholism is a boring subject. Kubrick came up with a much better idea, that the horror at the heart of The Shining is about the horror of being married to Shelley Duvall. Not there's anything wrong with Shelley Duvall. I mean, she's a devoted wife and mother. It was just a disastrous choice for Jack Torrance to make. And to me, at any rate, it seems that all of the madness of The Shining is Jack attempting to get revenge on his wife, or if you like, on himself, for the very foolish decision that he made in matrimony. Anyway, those are my thoughts about David Mikish's book, Stanley Kubrick, American Filmmaker. If you are a Stanley Kubrick fan, as I am, this is an essential book for you. Final look at the chat. Tricky Woo says, Kubrick, trust your bug novel, Stephen. John Berkshire Respecter says, it's the house that is haunted in The Shining. When I was talking about the film, The Haunting, haunted house, yeah, really? Okay. What is it that makes a house haunted? Well, people must be receptive to the numinous, because otherwise it's just a bunch of stuff flying around, or things that could be explained in various ways. Okay, why do you say that about Jack's wife? Because it's just nails on the blackboard to him. See, we don't get any. I've never read The Shining, but, King's books, they're all like this big. And, let's talk about things that happened, all this minutia going back decades. And as to how Jack Torrance ended up with his wife, well, we don't know. It's really not necessary to know. What we do know is their marriage is an absolute disaster. And we see that, I suppose, Jack Torrance is too cowardly to take it out on his wife, at least, until she discovers that box full of his manuscript. But he takes it out on Danny. And he dislocates his shoulder. And, he later tries to rationalize this, saying that it was, temporary loss of motor control. But, you see that haunting scene where Jack Nicholson is talking to Danny and is like, Danny, I would never hurt you or your mother. You know that, right? And you think, oh, God, get out of there. Get out of that room. Duvall was too meek for working with Kubrick. Well, one of the things I hate about most horror films, particularly those that involve the supernatural, or those that involve, a slasher or a serial killer and he's in our midst, is that you require people to be terrified, or at least to act terrified. And they're never terrified. Shelley Duvall is terrified in The Shining, and that is why it works. And she had to be bullied in order to be terrified, because to keep that up, to keep up the hysteria and the panting and the screaming and the shaking, obviously, given the opportunity, any actress or any actor is going to relax. And he didn't want her to relax. And I mean, you can see it. You can see it on the screen. Let's see. Media has says, wasn't it the pagan reincarnation concept, recycling of dead people like the girl twins, the bathroom attendant, etc.? In the book, it started with the Indian burial ground. Well, again, I have no interest in Indian burial grounds. It just seems like a cheap stunt to me. But people create narratives in their heads. I mean, as to why the twins appear and all the rest of it. People pick up, fragments of information, and they construct things, out of it. And, to what extent what has happened in The Shining, to, these apparitions from, room 237, what was actually in room 237? Well, we don't really know, really. Danny went in there, and apparently he was absolutely terrified of what he saw. But The Shining is as much, it's about people in isolation going mad. And I think that madness is a far more interesting subject than alcoholism. Again, with the movie The Haunting, when people go mad, they use the furniture in the room, as it were, to construct their own madhouse. Let's see. Okay. I think that's it for tonight. Is the perfect ever the enemy of the good in film making? I wondered about that with art generally. There's this Hungarian author moved to Canada, Stephen Vincenze. He later moved to the United States because these sort of people, Brian Moore, he came from Belfast, and we call him a Canadian author. He got out the first chance he got and moved to California. Vincenze spent 20 years writing this novel called An Innocent Millionaire, and it is really good. Okay. But I'm thinking, 20 years? How many novels could you have written in 20 years? Is this the greatest novel ever written? I don't know that I would say that. But no, I see the problem there. That it's possible to dick around with a project endlessly. But Kubrick was always searching for new ideas. He was always, and he was always looking to change things. The ending of Full Metal Jacket is far more brutal in the original than in the finished version. And Kubrick, he shot this original ending, and he just decided that it didn't work. It didn't work. Kubrick, and this is described in Mikish's book, that they're spending all these days filming the rape scene in A Clockwork Orange. And Kubrick says, this isn't working. This is boring. I need something different here. And he's thinking, what is it that the actors can add to this? And he turns to Malcolm McDowell and he says, Malcolm, can you dance? Now, the way that Malcolm McDowell tells the story is different than it's told in Mikish's book. Malcolm McDowell has told this story so many times. I'm sure he has many different versions. That in the version that I saw, and I think it's in the official movie biography that came with the Warner Brothers set of Kubrick films. So Malcolm McDowell says, can I dance? Because he was trained at RADA or some such place. And so he starts doing some soft shoe, and he starts singing a song, and that song is Singing in the Rain. Now, Mikish says that McDowell had said that's the only song that he knew. But anyway, he starts doing this soft shoe and Singing in the Rain, and Kubrick said, yes, this is it. And that night, he secured the rights to the use of the song for $10,000. And of course, this has this just enormous payoff twice in the movie, where Alex has gone back to the subversives' home, and he's taken in, and he's given a hot bath, and he's thinking, life is looking up again. And he starts singing that song, Singing in the Rain. And of course, that song has an association to him because of what he and his droogs had done in the house, but he'd completely forgotten about all that. He said he recognized the writer, but he said we wore our maskies in those days, so he wasn't worried about being discovered visually, but he forgot about the sound. In the same way that we see the reverse of that in 2001, and this was Gary Lockwood's idea. Kubrick had obviously said something like, yeah, this scene here is boring. What can we add? And Lockwood said, how about if Hal can read lips? which is really a genius stroke. I remember when I first saw it in the theater that people gasped when they saw that, because you just see the camera panning left, right, left, right, left. And it's not spelled out. You just see their lips moving silently. And Kubrick left it to the audience to make the connection. As I said, they made the connection and they gasped in shock and horror, because Kubrick was always looking for those kinds of effects. I mean, if you go to The Shining, for instance, okay, Jack seems to be at his wit's end, and he's sure bouncing that ball against the wall a lot. And he doesn't want to talk about his work. And he tells Shelley Duvall to stay the hell out of here. Okay. But what is he doing? He's obviously, on the verge of snapping, So Shelley Duvall comes into his room and she sees a big box full of typewriter paper that's been typed on. So, so my husband, yeah, what is this novel that he's writing? All Jack and no play makes, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And it's not telegraphed, We're left to make the connection that Jack Torrance has, that he's gone over the edge. Any symbolism using Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in A Clockwork Orange? Well, no, it's in the novel. Kubrick streamlined that because in the novel, we find out from Anthony Burgess, who, of course, was a composer himself, knew an enormous amount of classical music, that various other works are mentioned. But Kubrick decided to focus solely on Beethoven and on one Beethoven work, the Ninth Symphony. Similarly, with the streamlining, the tagline for Lolita was, how did they make a film of Lolita? Well, the secret is, and Mikish doesn't mention this in the book, but if you've read the book, it's about a serial pedophile named Humbert Humbert who searches, Europe for nymphets. That is to say that he has had sexual intercourse with the, 11, 12-year-old girls, whatever, bunch of them, which makes him a monster. But in the movie version, we only get one nymphet, and it's Lolita. And so this changes Humbert Humbert from being a monster into what is arguably a tragic situation. That here's this man who falls because of one tragic flaw. Are Kubrick films horror films? I don't know. I mean, you could look at A Clockwork Orange as a horror film, certainly. But before I leave off here, I want to mention one thing about A Clockwork Orange, which is its use of manipulation, particularly in violence. That you see that the violence that Alex metes out to his droogs and to the bully boys, and to the writer and his wife, and to the cat lady sculptor. It is all exceedingly stylized. Whereas the violence that is meted out to Alex, starting with his being, beaten up and spat at in the police cell, it is entirely naturalistic, such that we feel the violence meted out to Alex far more than we feel the violence that he meted out to his victims. And it's remarkable, Kubrick's control of this. When the lodger, when he comes back to his parents' apartment, Philip Stone, "Don't take it like that, son. See, Joe has a contract, you see." Great performance by Philip Stone. But when the lodger says, he says something like, "You've made others suffer, so it's only right that you suffer in turn. I listened here night after night and see the things that you've done made me sick." And you think, this creep, you hate this guy, but everything that he is saying is true. Everything that he is saying is true. And Alex leaves the apartment and he walks along the Thames with his sad bundle like this. And the use of music as manipulation, the sad bit from the William Tell overture, and he's looking out across the Thames and you realize that he's thinking of doing himself in. And this is an unrepentant rapist and murderer, and you feel sorry for him. It's really remarkable. Anyway, that's it for the week. I will be back on the air on Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Briefly, what is coming up culture-wise on the show? On Theater Thursday, an old film from 1932, an early noir and a message film, a very powerful message film, actually. It's called I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, directed by Mervyn LeRoy and starring Paul Muni. And on the book club next week, I will be discussing, in honor of the 100th anniversary of the Miracle of the Vistula, Norman Davis's White Eagle, Red Star. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to donate to this live stream, greatly appreciate it, especially at this time. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send a donation directly to me via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to find a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.